The way that I like to describe Acts 2 is the whole of Acts 2 is crowds being turned into disciples. Acts 2 starts with the 120 and then all the crowds that they're preaching to, maybe thousands, and then you end with, this group of 3,000 plus disciples, and God's adding to their number every day.
That's where the movement comes from.
That's how the church works.
That's right.
And so at our church at Mercy Hill, we don't shy away from drawing this connection for people. So Pastor Andrew does this a lot. I recently did this at a leader gathering, where we tell people, hey, we got to reach the crowds to make disciples.
That's right.
So in Mercy Hill's history over the last 12 and a half years, it's hard to even track all this stuff down, but I had some of our team track this down. We've had 20,000 first-time guests come to Mercy Hill over the last 12 years. And here's the cool thing. Out of every 10 first-time guests, we typically, and this is only what God can do, we typically will have one baptism.
That's awesome.
Out of that. And so we've had 1,800 baptisms at Mercy Hill over the last 12 years, and 600 of those have been college students. Yep. And here's the cool thing. So if 10% of the first-time guests are going to get baptized at Mercy Hill, around 10% of those are going to get sent out of Mercy Hill.
Yep.
And so in the last 12 years, we're getting to the point now pushing 200 people that have been sent out of Mercy Hill long-term, not on a mission trip.
Right.
We're talking about
2 years longer.
Yeah. Yep. We're selling stuff. We're moving, our whole family moving our life. And we just try so hard not to divorce this at Mercy Hill. The point in all of that is, Acts 2:41 produced 42 through 47.
That's right.
You
don't get the 42 through 47 without the 41.
Exactly.
Yep.
Those things go together. And so if churches want to see the church planting, they want to see all the different stuff, we got to not divorce growing from sending and multiplication.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
All right, everybody. Hey, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. My name is Pastor Bobby, and today I have back on the podcast for the second time, Pastor Jonathan Yarborough, the albino rhino.
What's up? What's up?
All right. Hey, I am really looking forward to today's episode because today is really getting at the core of what Breaking Barriers is, which is helping churches to grow and helping churches to go. And very specifically today, we've done some of this in the past, but we haven't done this for a while. We're really going to make the connection between growing and going and how many times many churches separate those things.
I think it's even more than just churches, where a lot of times people kind of talk to us about all the sending stuff we have going, and they want us to talk about all the systems that produce all of the sending. And we're like, you can't forget that what produces all this stuff is the growing stuff.
Yeah, so it's really cool what God has done over the last almost 13 years at Mercy Hill. We have just been at the plow, doing the work of the ministry, preaching the gospel. And as the church has grown with just people coming to Christ, there have been, especially over the last 5 years, all of these really, really cool stories of multiplication.
That's awesome.
And sending. And we're going to share some of those stories today. But as word has kind of gotten out of, churches we've planted or teams we've sent overseas, people want to, get you to speak or Pastor Andrew or myself. And a lot of times, the topic is, hey, can you come and, help other leaders understand how to create a sending culture? And a lot of times I think what they're getting at and asking that question is, man, if we can only learn the system, or if we can only learn the trellis or the leadership pipeline you guys have put into place, well, then certainly then other churches will be able to multiply, other churches will be able to send. And a lot of times when I hear it kind of phrased like that, I'm like, hey, that stuff's important for creating a culture, but it's not what actually fuels a culture of sending or multiplication.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a guy one time he was spending all this time building out these systems for this residency that they were going to create. I mean, he was so far in the weeds of all the details of this stuff. But here's the kicker. They didn't have any people to actually go in the residency. And so it's like people get it backward and think you're supposed to create the systems before you have the momentum with the people. But really, you got to start with the momentum.
So let's take a minute and just share, just really celebrate what God has done. And, I told our church this recently at one of our monthly or quarterly leader gatherings. I was kind of sharing some of these just stories. These are all stories that people at our church already know, but I just wanted to celebrate them that, this is not what the pastors do. It's not because we have some great ideas. It's really all of the sending that we've seen in the multiplication is because our church has bought into the mission.
That's right. And it's not the people that respond to it aren't like these rock star people. They're like normal folks that just take step after step after step within that flywheel and end up doing amazing things.
100%. Yeah. So let's just spend 5 minutes and maybe share some of these stories. I mean, it just kind of gives me chills just kind of celebrating this stuff. And churches in our stream, church that are going to listen to the Breaking Barriers stuff, this is what they're trying to do. This is what they want to see. I think of the story of Rachel and Josiah. Rachel was came to Mercy Hill very early on as a college student, got baptized at Mercy Hill, went through a residency here, came on staff, then felt the call to go be a missionary, goes overseas for a couple years as a missionary, comes back to Mercy Hill. We convince her again because she's so awesome and so sharp to come back on our staff. She did an awesome job. In the meantime, she gets married. Her husband, Josiah, has a deep passion for missions. And now we send them basically almost to the other side of the world. One of the cool things, though, is not only did we send them, and that's normally what happens, right? Right. Somebody has a calling. You send them to the IMB. Hey, send them out. Yep. But we were able to bring them on stage at Mercy Hill and send them as a whole team.
That's right.
Which was just amazing. But just to think, to go from college student to missionary to church planner, it's like, man, that is the end goal. That's what we're going for. Man, share some other stuff.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about like Tanner. He just planted a church in Norfolk, and he jumped onto our staff doing residency and all of that, coming out of like the teaching background, and works his way, becomes like the middle school student pastor. And then next thing you know, he's planting a church in Norfolk, taking like what seemed like about half of our staff with him, to one of our campuses, like a whole bunch of elders from there, just this massive team. But the cool thing about it, the coolest part, was that when they stood up on the stage together as a team, they had like half of them had on these baptism T-shirts representing that they had been baptized at Mercy Hill, and now here they are going to be a part of a church plant. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, so amazing. And we have realized, and even talking to other churches that have planted a lot of churches, for us, I think it's maybe a third of those church planting teams are filled with graduated college students that have come to Christ or really got on fire for the mission here at Mercy Hill.
We first met them on the college campus.
Yeah, amazing. Think about Pastor Brody. And I had a chance a couple months ago to be over there with them. He planted a church in Waynesville, North Carolina. Brody's a cool story too, because sent out as a missionary to Europe, comes back, gets on our staff, goes through our residency, gets trained, goes and plants a church in his hometown, which is really cool.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah. I was thinking about Jeremy, Jeremy was one of the first people that I kind of got to know coming around Mercy Hill. And back in the days when he was doing college ministry, and then to find out as I'm coming on the staff team, he's starting to think about going and planting in Canada of all places. It ends up going to Halifax, not just to plant a church, but to plant like this church planting hub out of Halifax. And so that became, our first international church plant, just going across the line there in Canada. But they've quickly become one of the largest churches up there in the Halifax area. So it's pretty awesome what's going on there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I also think about last year, we saw 200 people go on short-term mission trips. We got a big vision this year to see 300 people go on short-term mission trips. I know.
And almost that many already registered this year.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Those trips are, it's about the missionaries we're serving and loving on, but a lot of it is about creating the sending culture,
right.
helping people to catch a vision for international missions. Earlier this year, when we do Sent Weekend, this is a big sort of culture thing at Mercy Hill to get a lot of people fired up in one weekend. We had 100 people come to an interest dinner of being interested in long-term missions, which is crazy.
Yeah. Before that, it'd been 65, and I remember being blown away by that number, and to see 100 people show up in the room. That was pretty amazing.
Yeah. We've recently planted a church in the last couple years in Roanoke, Virginia.
Right in the middle of COVID.
Yep, right smack in the middle of COVID. Carter Mundy, amazing story. So was on the original launch team that planted Mercy Hill 13 years ago. Came here, got a normal job, and worked that normal job for like 10 years. And then felt a calling to, he was a lay elder at Mercy Hill, felt a calling to plant a church. We trained him up the best that he could, but he had the best education, seeing the church grow, seeing the culture of the church, being on the ground floor of all of that, and then going to plant a new work in Roanoke. Pretty amazing.
When we started talking about all the adoption and foster care stuff, and then it became the Chosen ministry after Pastor Andrew preached the sermon on Chosen and all that. And so now here we are sitting at like 170 families that have already stepped into adopting and fostering. And then just this past weekend, had this interest dinner and had over 100 people come to take first steps to get into that. So with that goal we have of seeing 200 families, man, it's about to become reality.
Wow. I think of the story of Jacob and Ashley, another really cool story. Ashley, I think, had just graduated college when she started at Mercy Hill almost 13 years ago. Jacob was a college student.
Right.
And they come around, and the vast majority of their time at Mercy Hill, they were not married. They were just kind of plugging away at Mercy Hill, both of them trying to live on mission. And just to see the way that God grew them really across like a 10-year period. And I didn't have quite the firsthand experience, but a pretty firsthand experience recently. They're now missionaries on the other side of the world,
right.
And they're there basically doing business
right.
for the glory of God, trying to reach people. My wife had an opportunity to go visit them. It's literally on the other side of the globe from where we're at. And she was just so encouraged because, just to get to be around their business and people from that country that are working for them in their business. And so they have an opportunity to be around them, share their faith with them, and just, man, think about how cool that is. And they're there. You know what I mean? Like they're there. They're right. Plugged in. They're there.
Like when we say do something that you do well for the glory of God, but do it somewhere strategic for the mission of God. I mean, that's the epitome of that.
100%. Hey, talk about RMC and then talk about some of the cohorts we've done recently, and then we'll kind of keep moving through this.
Sure, yeah. So we have this thing called the Residential Mission Community. We call it RMC because everything seems like it has to be an acronym,
Totally.
So, yeah, and so it's like we've got 12 people, including kids, that are currently living in an apartment complex in High Point, where there are a lot of internationals that have moved in there with refugees and all that. And so they're spending 9 months where they've moved their lives into that apartment complex, where they're learning what it looks like to live their lives on mission before we send them, 8,000 miles across the world to go do that in a context they don't know. So they're figuring out, what it looks like to resolve conflict in those kinds of situations. And so it's like putting everything right there in the middle of the fire before we send them off, So you've got that's going on. And then we've got 75 people that are in a disciple-making intensive, learning how to share the gospel cross-culturally right now. And so those are the things that kind of lead to our international sending. So it's all these people that are in the pipeline getting ready to go. It's pretty awesome stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'll share one last one, and then I'll keep kind of moving through this. I think about New City, in Tampa, one of the first churches that we planted, and just to think now, I know Pastor Andrew was down there recently. They have people from New City that were sent out of Mercy Hill to help plant New City that are now wanting to be sent out of New City to do other works, and it's just cool to kind of see that multiplication. Multiple churches that we've planted in the last 4 years, and I share all this with you to say, if there's any Mercy Hill people listening to this, it's all because of you guys that we're able to do this. You guys give of your time, talent, treasure. This is how these things are able to happen. But over the last, I'd say 5 years especially, more people have been looking in to what's happening at Mercy Hill, because a lot of churches want to plant churches, but it's pretty hard to plant churches where you actually parent those churches.
Yep.
Right? I mean, there's a lot of churches in the Southern Baptist Convention that they may give to a church plant. They may have a church planter.
Partner.
Yeah, they may have somebody come speak, at their church, and they want to but that's a big difference. And we did that, and that's awesome. It's good for culture, but that's very different than actually planting and parenting a church. What would you say are some of the differences there?
Well, when you're not parenting, it's like you don't have any responsibility for the church after it's planted.
Mm-hmm.
You may have some people that go with you that you're checking in on, taking care of them, but when it comes to seeing the success of the church plant itself, you don't have much responsibility when it comes to that. But it's similar to like when you send your kids off into the world. You want to still stay involved with them, help them to be successful. So there's a different kind of connection that you have. And so when you parent a church plant like that, you're equipping them all in-house. So all the training is coming from you. Most of the resourcing for that church plant is coming from your church. The people that are going to be a part of that team are coming from your church. And then they're a part of this family after they plan out, and so you still have this ongoing relationship with them where you're continuing to invest in them and continuing to help them be successful.
Yeah, awesome. So these are just some of the stories. Honestly, this is not the full well of stories at Mercy Hill. I mean, there are dozens.
Just a snapshot.
There are dozens of stories beyond this. I share all of this to build the need, though, to say this is what we're all going after.
It's what we celebrate.
Yeah. I mean, churches that are part of breaking barriers, right? Churches that want to plant churches, that want to multiply. I mean, this is what is sexy in the church planting world. Pastor Andrew hates when I say that.
I don't mind it.
This is what's sexy in the church planting world is all this multiplication, all this really awesome stuff. The question is, okay, what creates the fire for this stuff? What creates the momentum, And so many times the assumption, I think, well, it's a system. It's a trellis. It's a pipeline. And so, some things here maybe that people would say, okay, is it giving to missions that creates this? I would say no. Yep. Is it talking about church planting? That's important, but no. Is it really focusing on discipleship? I don't think so. Is it because we go super deep relationally? Nope. Is it because our awesome residency program? I think the answer is no. And all of those things are important. And I do think we could do another podcast at some point talking about building that system, building that trellis, whatever. But those things, I don't think, are at the very heart of how to create this sort of movement sending.
Anybody can build all of that stuff. But if you don't have the first thing that fuels all of that, then it's to no.
Right. All right. So I'm going to leave everybody on the hook just a little bit to continue to kind of build the need. And I want to go to Acts chapter 2, which most pastors, most leaders are very familiar with the story of Acts chapter 2, and kind of walk through this and draw the connection for people between growing and going. Yeah. Because for whatever reason, even though we know all the parts of Acts chapter 2, I am pretty convinced that a lot of times kind of the beginning of Acts ends up getting separated from the end of Acts. So we think about Acts chapter 2. So verse 1 of Acts chapter 2, it says, when the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place. The they there is basically however many disciples there were at that point, right? 120, whatever. Right. That's the movement. That's the church. Those are the people that said, man, we're on mission together. Yep. So that's the crowds in the very beginning of Acts. There was 100-something people, right? Okay, well, Peter then preaches this sermon all about Jesus, and that is the majority of what Acts chapter 2 is, Peter preaching this sermon. Well, then when you get to Acts chapter 2, verse 40, this is what people are more familiar about. Then it says this, so after he's done with the sermon, it says, and with many words he bore witness and continued to exhort them, saying, save yourselves from this crooked generation. So those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. Okay, so he preaches this sermon. You have 3,000. I mean, there's maybe 10,000 people there, 5,000 people. I don't know, but I mean, this is massive, right?
It's huge.
Massive movement of God. It says 3,000 souls were added that day. And then right after that, you have verse 42. And I would say church planners, that kind of world, that culture. I've been in that world. You've been in that world.
This is where we live.
Yep. We're most familiar with verse 42 through verse 47.
Right.
Churches create their mission around this. They create their strategy. We at Mercy Hill have done that exact same thing. Hey, What did the early church look like? Let's mimic that. Let's mirror that. And I'll read that very quickly. So in verse 42, it says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayers. And all came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved.
That's awesome.
All right. I share all of that, okay, to make this point. Where did the disciples from verse 42 through 47, right? All of these disciples who are together, they're breaking bread, they're attending the temple, they're in each other's homes.
They're doing all the things. Relationship
is happening. They're giving of their time, talent, treasure, like the thing is moving, right? Movement is happening. Okay, where do all these disciples come from? Because here's the thing that I think gets missed so many times. I'm not sure why. I can't really tell you the history of this. I mean, even if you read your Bible, in most Bibles, and I would encourage anybody that has a Bible with like subtitles and stuff, right? Those things weren't in the original text, but people go back and add those in to help us kind of read through and understand, okay, here's the section, here's the section. In most Bibles, there's a separation between verse 41 and 42.
Yep.
And a lot of times people, it's like they're over here, right? You have Peter preaching the sermon, reaching all these people, 3,000 souls, and then you have discipleship happening over here.
Yeah, it's like we think that the 120 number or whatever from verse 1 is what fueled the verse 42, all the people that were getting together.
Right. And so what I would say is, okay, when we're asking, man, where does all the discipleship come from in verse 42 through 47? It came from the harvest of 3,000 souls.
What?
Just as simple as that. I mean, one way to say it is like the disciples come from the harvest.
Right.
And I don't know why people miss this, but it's like, if you want to see discipleship, if you want to see movement, there needs to also be a harvest.
That's right.
Like,
That's right.
They just go together.
Yeah.
You can't divorce them. I don't know why they're divorced, and we may be talking for years and years at Breaking Barriers of why people divorce these, but you shouldn't.
Well, I mean, you said it earlier. We think about it as one of these things is way sexier than the other.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, you don't get the one without the other.
Yeah, the way that I like to describe Acts 2 is the whole of Acts 2 is crowds being turned into disciples. Yeah. Like Acts 2 starts with the 120, and then all the crowds that they're preaching to, maybe thousands, and then you end with, this group of 3,000 plus disciples, and God's adding to their number every day.
That's where the movement comes from.
That's how the church works.
That's right.
And so like at our church at Mercy Hill, we don't shy away from drawing this connection for people. So Pastor Andrew does this a lot. I recently did this at a leader gathering, where we tell people, hey, we got to reach the crowds to make disciples.
That's right.
So in Mercy Hill's history over the last 12 and a half years, it's hard to even track all this stuff down, but I had some of our team track this down. We've had 20,000 first-time guests come to Mercy Hill over the last 12 years. And here's the cool thing. Out of every 10 first-time guests, we typically, and this is only what God can do, we typically will have one baptism.
That's awesome.
Out of that. And so we've had 1,800 baptisms at Mercy Hill over the last 12 years, and 600 of those have been college students.
That is amazing.
It
goes to the whole thing about the third. A third of the people that we sent out on church plants.
Totally.
College students.
Totally. Yep. And here's the cool thing. So if 10% of the first-time guests are going to get baptized at Mercy Hill, around 10% of those are going to get sent out of Mercy Hill.
Yep.
And so in the last 12 years, we're getting to the point now pushing 200 people that have been sent out of Mercy Hill long-term, not on a mission trip.
Right.
We're talking about
2 years longer.
Yeah. Yep. We're selling stuff. We're moving, like our whole family, moving our life. And so the point in all of that, and we just try so hard not to divorce this at Mercy Hill. The point in all of that is, man, Acts 2:41 produced 42 through 47.
That's right.
Like
You don't get the 42 through 47 without the 41.
exactly.
Yep.
Those things go together. And so if churches want to see the church planting, they want to see all the different stuff, we got to not divorce growing from sending and multiplication.
That's right.
And we can't vilify one of them, because people will often want to vilify, a church growing or the weekend gatherings or just more butts and seats or whatever. And, like we'll tell our people, we told our leaders this, like, we're never going to do that. Mm-hmm. We're never going to vilify the idea of at Easter.
We're going to try to get as many people to come as we possibly can.
Exactly. We don't feel bad about that.
We're going to set high goals.
Exactly.
And ask God to meet them.
Yep. Because, the 3,000 souls, man, you need that to turn into discipleship.
Right.
I recently heard somebody over one of the largest church planting networks, and he was talking about how, because there are a lot of churches that they love the idea of sending and they love the idea of multiplication, but maybe they don't, have a lot of people getting baptized, and maybe they don't have, they're not trying to reach lots of people, and he made the point, these churches get real excited about church planting and multiplication, and then once they get really excited, they'll call him and they'll say, "Hey, man, can you send us a church planter?" Mm. And he jokingly kind of said, it don't really work that way.
Yeah.
Because
the planters come from you.
Yeah, from the harvest.
Yeah.
And like anything you want to see 5 years from now or 10 years from now, those people likely, some of them are like leaders in your church already, but many of them
aren't even saved yet.
No.
Yeah.
It's a person out in the community that's not even following God at all, doesn't even attend church.
That's right.
That's right.
I mean, we were kind of that way too, when we first started thinking about planting, and we were like, hey, we need to get people to come to us so that we can train them to be a church planter, people that want to plant a church, and then we can help them get there. They can become our planter.
Right.
And we started finding that it just doesn't work that way. We got to start with what God has given us, and so that means we need to reach more people, and some of them are going to become church planters.
Yeah, and you could do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but it's just not a very sustainable
That's right.
multiplication model. And when I think about it, like you almost can put movements or churches into sort of different types of buckets. One of them is, people that really focus. And I think there's a lot of churches like this. They really focus on discipleship. Maybe they really focus on multiplication, but it's kind of to the exclusion of growing and the crowds.
Right.
And what happens in these churches is they may actually get a team of people to go out and plant a new church, maybe in the same town, maybe somewhere else. But if they're not adding through the harvest, if they're not reaching new people,
not sustainable.
No, it ends up being a model that's like subtraction.
That's right.
And I don't think that's a long-term like biblical model.
We call it multiplication, but in reality, it becomes subtraction because they're not refilling the pool
right.
out of which they're sending.
Yeah, I mean, it's just math, right?
That's right.
I mean, if you have 200 people at your church and you send
50,
now you have 150.
Right.
If you do that again, now you have 100.
That's right.
And I mean, it is scary. I want to commend those churches.
That's right.
I mean, it's scary. I remember when we helped to plant New City. I remember Pastor Andrew and I talking, and just being so afraid because, Pastor Eric was a great leader, and there was all these amazing leaders from Mercy Hill that were going to go be a part of this church, and it's scary.
It's never, the people that go are never the people that you want to go.
Because they're just awesome.
That's right.
They're just awesome leaders. They give of their time, talent, treasure in your church. But the reality is and God has done this at Mercy Hill. We were so afraid, how will we ever, replace that person or this person or this person? But it's like, man, you can't replace them, but in some ways God's done it.
That's right.
Through brand new people.
That's right.
That, this was 5-6 years ago. And through the time that they were leaving, other people were coming to Christ and then getting plugged into a community group and beginning to grow in their faith. And before you know it, 5-6 years later, it's like, wait a minute, we've sent all these people out and now the church is bigger now.
But if we hadn't focused on trying to go reach new people, and that wouldn't have ever been replaced.
Yep. So another thing I think you can see is you have churches maybe focus on the crowds.
Yeah.
So the beginning of Acts 2, and maybe they don't focus as much on discipleship and sending. And what would you call this sort of movement?
I mean, that's just straight up addition right there.
Right.
Right. So when you're looking at it mathematically, and this would be like back in the 90s, that church growth movement that was going on, where it's just churches get as big as they possibly can, but they're not doing anything about the multiplication thing and sending people out.
Right. So like, man, and nothing wrong. I mean, nothing wrong with just straight up, you're reaching people, it's like, man, it's the beginning of Acts 2.
That's right.
Man, you got 200 people, you reach 20 people, you now have 220 people. But it is addition, and that is different than multiplication. Because the movement long-term to really grow is multiplication.
Yeah.
And so when you're thinking about multiplication, here's the difference, okay? You're reaching people here, and because of the multiplication, you're reaching people there.
That's right.
Okay?
Case in point would be like Carter.
Right.
Right.
Share that.
Yeah. So Carter, how many baptisms was it they just had?
5.
5. Yeah. So we had nothing to do with that. We planted Carter up in Roanoke, and then he's reporting back to us that they just baptized 5 people. And so we didn't do anything with discipling those people that he had reached, but because we had sent him out and multiplied the church, it's like the gospel work is going on there independent of what we've done. We've multiplied the work at that point.
Right. Yeah, and that is the compounding effect of multiplication, So
think about it. When he plants a church now, same thing's going to happen. Right.
You think about so that's what multiplication looks like. You can even think about like the compounding effect of money. Like you can have money in your hand, and you take it and invest it somewhere. Now that money sitting over there is growing, and so it's like there's a compounding effect where the old money that has grown, now that money is also growing.
Right.
So like you think about that Sunday at Mercy Hill. Let's say we had 5 baptisms, and it's like, okay, that's what we were focused on, right? We're focused on the ministry here at Mercy Hill, preaching the gospel, reaching people. 5 people get baptized that Sunday. Well, now over in Roanoke, you also have 5 people getting baptized.
Right.
We did nothing, right?
But that's the beauty of multiplication.
Right. The people that we had reached and sent out, now they're reaching new people.
That's right.
That's movement, right? I mean, that grows to a point where you lose the ability to even track it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the gospel movement.
Yep.
I mean, that's how we got here.
Starfish and the spider stuff. Right?
Yeah. I mean, that's from, Acts 2 on. So, what we tell our church is, growth and life change is the engine for sending. Like, and we've said this so many times with Breaking Barriers, you can grow without sending, but you cannot send without growing.
That's right.
Like, man, long term, for it to be sustainable, like you could send once maybe, but to send long term, you have got to be growing because those people are going to come from the harvest, And I share all that it's not to guilt people or make people feel bad or think, oh, we did it all ourselves. It's so that part of what we could focus on is praying that we can reach people that are outside of our church, that are outside of the faith, and that those people can be reached through the ministry of our church. They'll begin to grow, get discipled, like 42 through 47 says at the end of Acts, and then God begins to add to our number and just kind of spur that on over and over and over and over.
Hey, can you go back to, we're chasing this thing of like being able to send out 500 people. And people are always wanting us to talk about all the sending systems that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And so they may be surprised at what we're focused on this year that will get us to that. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And I'm just so thankful that we have, we've built this culture at Mercy Hill where some people scoff at this, but not that many people scoff at this. Because like you said, people know, man, our due north is we want to see 5,000 baptisms and 500 people sent out of Mercy Hill. Right. So like this year's goal for Mercy Hill is we want to see 5,000 first-time guests,
That's right.
Some churches, some pastors, not that number, but they couldn't even have a first-time guest goal because they would feel some way about that.
And it would be weird if it wasn't connected to the sending thing. But all the stuff we've just talked about, shows that if we focus here on seeing more people come in, that gives us an opportunity to reach more people. That gives us an opportunity to baptize more people. And that gives us an opportunity to send more people. So it's like looking way upstream and setting the goal on that to get to the end goal.
Yeah, like that 10 to 1, 10 to 1.
That's right.
So like, man, if God blessed it and the Holy Spirit breathed on it, and we did have 5,000 first-time guests at Mercy Hill this year, then most likely we'd probably see in the 300 to 500 people get baptized. And out of that number,
we're going to see
7 years from now, 10 years from now,
30 to 50 of them get sent.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's like I was sharing with our leaders, like, man, 5 years from now, that church planning team, because at this point we can all imagine that group of people standing on stage, those people are not at Mercy Hill right now.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, they're out in the community, and we want to pray and share the gospel and use all the biblical principles to try to reach them. Yep. So that's why we have no issue at Mercy Hill of just identifying that goal of 5,000 first-time guests and then doing a ton of stuff to try to partner with our church to help them actually invite.
So talk about what are some of those things that we would challenge the church to do to see the 5,000 become reality? Yeah.
So over the last 3 or 4 years, we have tried to build a really good come and see strategy, where gospel movement is go and tell, people going out to the community and sharing their faith one-on-one and in groups. There's also a big part of a come and see strategy throughout the New Testament. And so we partner with our people with that. People at Mercy Hill know at this point, we just call them big days, Easter, Christmas, back to school, Kids Week, those sort of things.
They're just days that we know a lot of people are going to tend to show up.
Yeah. I mean, the church, most places in the West, if you did a service around Christmas, you just got more people. Right. Service around Easter. Every single sermon series at this point, do more of a, who's your one? Yep. And we see different churches, just, hey, this would be a great day to bring a friend, be real clear gospel presentation. We're going to baptize people, hopefully. All of this is, the fact that the disciples come from the crowds. Yep. And we know that. And, the engine for sending is growth.
That's right.
And so, as we're closing this out, I would just encourage people, have a strategy for the crowds and have a strategy for disciple making, right. and just marry them together as one strategy for your church, and don't try to separate those.
Yeah. We
see that so often.
Sometimes not just separate, but demonize the one that leads to the other.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Pastor Andrew has said this a lot. It's almost ironic that we grieve. You just think about the state of North Carolina. We grieve how many churches are dying every single year. And then on the other side of that, at the different conferences and stuff, you make people feel guilty for trying to grow their church or have more people attend their church because it's not discipleship.
Which is the very thing that keeps it from dying.
It's ironic. Any kind of closing thoughts about how, growth being the engine for sending or?
Man, I would just go back to the whole thing about systems, where if you start with the systems and you say, we're going to build the systems before we have the momentum, or yet we're not even going to worry about the momentum. We're going to trust that the systems are going to bring the people. Well, that's just not going to work. You got to focus on the momentum first. And then once you get the momentum going, then you can take the time to build the systems. Mm-hmm. One has to come before the other. The systems are hugely important. Don't hear me saying that that's not important. You got to have all that stuff to keep things between the rails, to maximize it, to make it efficient, all that kind of stuff. But if you're not putting the energy into growing the thing to start with, then the systems don't really matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. My closing thought would be, I kind of share this with some of our church plants, and it can be shocking to them at first, but once they get it, I think it's very helpful.
You going to shock me?
I don't know. We'll see. So when I'm talking on the phone with a church planner, maybe that has just planned the last year or last 2 years, a lot of times the conversations are around, man, how long can we make the finances last? Like how long is this thing going to last? I'm projecting out, like, is it 2 years, 4 years, 5 years? I was speaking to a church planner just this past week about this, and I was telling him this, and we think, okay, our biggest risk is not having enough money, or our biggest risk is not having a leadership pipeline or something like this. And I always just tell them, hey, your biggest risk is not growing early on.
You didn't shock me with that one.
Like, man,
that's the thing.
You got to be begging God for that. You got to be praying for that. You got to be preaching towards that end, right? You got to be discipling your people to invite, to share the gospel. Because, I mean, churches that die, it's not because they don't have money. It's not because they don't have a building. It's not because they don't have whatever. Many churches that die, they die because they're not reaching people.
And very quickly, that can become part of the culture, where that becomes normative, that they're not seeking that growth.
Right.
Once that becomes the culture, man, it's really hard.
It's tough to turn that around. Yeah. Man, Jonathan, thank you. Great episode. Man, I would encourage anybody, whenever you're listening to this, our Breaking Barriers 2024 conference is now open. So that was one of the best things we did last year. We had 50 churches attend the conference. We would love to double or triple that this year.
Triple.
And man, we're all about this sort of stuff. Man, we're never going to divorce, growing and going. And we're going to, man, talk all about, man, how you can, help your church to grow, how you can help your church to go. If you also are interested in this type of content, I would encourage you to check out our Breaking Barriers private Facebook group. We just try to share simple stuff like this to help people, see their church grow, see their church go.
That's awesome.
All right.
Thanks.
See you guys.